7-Eleven
What?
stands for, but
Oh, I don't know
like
either. It's a good question.
24/7 makes sense, but yeah, anyway, maybe it's 11 months a year. They just take a whole month off.
Maybe they were proud of being open 11 hours a day when they first started.
Maybe. All right.
That was exactly the case. It was in 1946, and they changed to reflect their new extended hours.
Nice.
Oh, okay. So, well, yeah, that doesn't feel like revolutionary number of hours to be open.
1946, though. Everyone went to bed at 9 then.
Fair enough. Interesting.
All right. Darn it. I don't know why like Google Docs always seems to slow down when I have my screen share on Zoom. Okay. Yeah, sorry. I can't do it. Maybe I stopped the screen share. Okay, there it goes, working. All right, I'm gonna add a couple possible things. Review screen, generator, ideas. Design. Was anything really specific to talk about? And I haven't really started the Form Explorer stuff. That's on my list. So really I should just call it data set. Okay, so Bryce, any things that you want to add?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head directly, but I'll add any if they come up.
Okay.
I'll go at the end.
Why don't we start with the first one looks pretty straightforward. You want to raise that one, Michelle?
Sure. So I linked the discussion specifically because the details are very specific. So I'll have to open that up, but we might, I don't know, this is not as fast as, because it's not loading for me. Okay, starting to load for me. If you can tap on the link maybe, and, oh, okay, you're there. So you explained in your image there, you explained what was going on. So you said that you pointed out that the job name at the time I noticed when I ran it that the job name was the object name.
Okay, this part here. Test income in values in the itemized job in your anonymized job. Right. So when you just report the name of an object, by default, DocAssemble will use the instance name.
Right. So
name of that item.
So in the review, you said you might want to add a string method, and that's what I did. In your review, you said, why did you add a string method? And this is why. You said maybe it would be more useful to talk about it in real time.
Let's take a look. You want to look at this is the AL toolbox, right?
Yep.
Well, I mean, it might be that I was inconsistent in my feedback over different amounts of time, but
yeah,
you have probably it's better to talk about the specific thing, but let's see if we can find it here. Are you talking about this? Not using the value
Nope,
function?
nope, it's lower down. It might be in the 19 other ones. Thank you for all the comments, by the way. Really thorough. I really appreciated that. So a little bit lower, I think.
It's a really
Yeah.
big one, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. So it wasn't why you have a string method.
That is why I had a string method.
So, okay, what is AL on the private class was a little confusing to me.
Well, it was specifically for this string method, was it? I think it may also be for the list of itemized. Yeah, I think it's just for this string
Class.
method, really, if I recall correctly.
So I don't think it is as fast a one as I was thinking, but we're on it, so we might as well follow it through. If it's totally, all right, it does say here it's a private class and it has an underscore, which makes sense for a private class. And it does say here is provide a better string value. But I just don't really like the idea of giving a thing that is shown publicly that depends on parsing the instance name of the object.
Okay.
It seems like an incidental doc symbolism rather than helpful information the user should normally see. Now, I do know that that is what docassemble does when it doesn't have any other way to display the name of an object.
Mhm.
And you try to put it on screen.
I
don't
think
we
they
should,
would probably use something like the object.name, like x.name or
yeah, that would make sense.
i.name or whatever. Or maybe it's source.
Source
Um,
probably makes sense, yeah. Or the value maybe would make sense, or
I whatever they assign the name to, right?
yeah. I mean, it'd probably be good.
It might have been in custom values, but I'm not sure
Okay, let's look back
now
at
at
that
this very
example
moment.
screen here. What do you get paid for? Yeah, I really don't, you wouldn't want to show like the hard-coded object instance name or even a parse version of it, because you also might want to use a reference. And
Mhm.
then I have found that the most feedback I get from stakeholders on
Mhm.
projects is always about names. So like maybe you hard-coded it to be SSI, but like, oh, we decided we want to call that Social Security instead.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to update all the logic in your interview, because maybe you had some specific follow-up things for just SSI objects, or maybe it's just displayed in a particular table in your output. You don't want to have to update those, right? So, but you always are updating the strings that the user sees. They're constantly, and then people are going to change their mind. They're going to go back and forth and have it be the opposite of what they said 2 weeks ago. That
Yeah.
happens too. So you don't want to rely on something that could possibly be used in code to be the
Okay.
only way to display it on screen.
Well, I can just take it out now, and if we need it later, it's in the history. So, you know,
We want a thing in the demo probably to model. Like this is a screen everyone will run into. You want
right.
something in here that will let them have a name that they choose for the value, displayed as the title of the screen.
Yes. But they can use .name, right? So,
That name would be perfect. Yeah.
or
So it's just like,
.source. So it should exist by that point, I think. So
okay,
if we find that somehow we absolutely have to use the name of the, like the direct string of the object, then we can always come back to this, but I don't think we'll need to. But the whole demo interview, I mean, like I say, it all needs to be reworked. So
okay. I don't think it's bad to have a
Uh-uh.
string method. You could make the string method return the name, right?
Oh,
It's an attribute of the
that's
same
true.
object. I'm just saying the string method should not rely on the intrinsic name of the object. You should
Oh,
have a
got
different
it.
method that's more descriptive.
Okay, so yeah, I'll have to find if it's the source or the name.
And then you might be able to get rid of that class too. I don't know if that's the only purpose.
Yeah, if that's the only purpose, then I can just get rid of that class and the developer can just use the .name. Yeah, I don't know exactly what was going on there. It's also very fragile in general. I think like if the name doesn't fit this specific format, then it's not going to work very well. So
Yes, another reason to avoid that instance name.
So I was kind of reluctant at the time, but I was like, all right, we'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
It's a conversation.
Yep, the string method can be return anything that's descriptive of an object. And I think probably that my comment on Teams
Mhm.
didn't add that nuance, but
Okay.
that could be why you went down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. So I think it's good to have a string method. Let's just make it what you think people would want to use for the default, and then they can always override it. Something that comes to mind right away is that they're going to want to be able to translate it. They're going to want to be able to tweak the string. And maybe is the name likely to be used in logic, or if there's a source attribute, which would be like the thing that they would use in logic. Is the name something the user gets to choose, or is designed to let them choose?
For a custom value, it is, they are, they created on the previous screen, I believe.
But if it is not custom, then there's no name that would be shown.
Well, if it's not custom, the developer can give it a name. And then they can
They give it
use
a
that
name.
name to do the translation,
They would need to
like
give
like
it a
we've done
name.
it before.
Yeah, I would
That's in the
imagine to be like
demo.
a dictionary that they would look it up in.
That's already in the demo, yeah.
Okay. So I'd probably like say if there's no name attribute, show the source, but look up in this dictionary of the, that would be good in the demo maybe, to show how you could show a name that the user can change. Because it's not just about translations, it's about tweaking language over time. But it would probably be best to key it to the source rather than the name. But of course, if the user puts in an arbitrary value,
There won't be a
name,
translation, yeah.
be a translation for it. So you have to handle that scenario too. And for what the default string value should be, I think it's nice to have one that's better than this really weird looking thing,
Yeah.
which is the default docassemble. I don't know if it should be the mount or if it should be the name slash
Yeah,
source.
that was also a question. But the
You just
amount
choose
as
one,
a
though, and
string
let them-
isn't useful because it's not actually a, you can't turn it into a currency value. So there's nothing particularly useful about using the amount as the name.
Well, it might be helpful to show both. I mean, think about it. If you're like, what if you want to see the contents of that list and you just want to be able to print it on screen quickly for maybe it's even just for debugging purposes. What do you want to know?
Okay.
You might want to know what are all of the amounts of all of your deductions printed out in a string on screen. Is that the best way that the author of an interview should use it? Probably not. They should customize it, put it in a table, or give it different context. But it is okay to give a simple default output that is meaningful. I'm just not sure which one would be more meaningful. Probably just seeing on your paycheck, you had SSI. You wouldn't even be SSI, would it? That wouldn't make sense on a paycheck. It would be like income, wages, health insurance. That's what I keep going to, taxes, Medicare, right? All the things that would be listed on a paycheck.
Okay,
Would you want to know that you had those items on your paycheck, or do you want to know
the
Yeah,
amounts of
all of
those
them.
items.
maybe both would be helpful to put in the default string method? Again, like the default string method might not be what anybody ever uses, but if you cover like a 30% use case, and it's like, this is the best I can do, but it's the plurality, this is what people would want a third of the time.
So what do you think people would want? Because you would know better than I would. I would just flip a coin. Like I have no idea what people want in this
Not really sure
situation.
either. I would say maybe listing them in order. So like saying wages, then a dollar value, and then insurance, a dollar value.
Okay,
That would be all I could think of. And it might not be very helpful.
with
for
a
people.
comma or something, or a colon?
I would use a colon between the two, the label and the value. And then I would use a comma to separate them, because it would be confusing to have a semicolon if you're already using a colon for different meaning in them.
A comma to separate them, so both a colon and a comma to separate them?
Label and value would be separated by a colon, and then the next item would be separated by a comma.
But that's not the string of the particular item.
I'll show you an example.
I mean, they can always do comma and value.
Oh, this is for
Right.
one value. Right.
Yes,
Sorry, I
this
forgot
is
it's
for one value.
Yeah, that, just use the colon, yeah, is what I would think. Or you could use
Okay.
parentheses. I mean, it's totally arbitrary. Like I said, this is not what
Just-
anyone should ever really
just-
use.
Just
but
type
having-
in and let me know what you want me to do, and I will do that.
Do you have any other ideas, Bryce? I mean, I'm just thinking about like, how can you let someone who's testing this get something useful? You said, sorry, did you say no, Bryce?
Sorry, yeah, no, I'm with Michelle on this one. I have no idea like what a reasonable default would be.
That's how I would, let me just see what that looks like, or wages. Because the idea would be you would mostly see it as a list, right?
But they can do comma and list. And so if I add a comma, then that's not going to be,
You'd want to see what it looks like.
oh, I see.
That was fine. And then I'm drawing a blank on other positive things you would do, like I guess vacation time. They can choose, you're right, they could choose the punctuation to separate the items, but they wouldn't be able to choose the punctuation inside. What looks better? I guess I would avoid the parentheses because sometimes that means negative values in accounting. So I think the colon is the best way to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. So I can try and do that. Is that post MVP or is that for MVP? Or just get rid of the string method for MVP, make an issue, or do you want me? I can do. I think I can do that.
Okay.
I mean, I can try and implement the string method in that way.
No, I think this is pretty good. I think, yeah, it was good to resolve this one. If you can delete this class before we merge it, it's great. So I'm just thinking like the fewer things that are, if they're confusing to us, they might confuse a developer as well. But I think it's unrealistic to have the demo file be ready. So I might just, I don't think you should remove it because it still has a lot of good stuff in it. We won't try to, we can do the demo file improvements in another PR, but if you can delete this class now, I think that's good.
So instead of implementing that string method that we just talked about.
If you could implement the string method, it's like a 2-line method, it might be worth it, but
okay.
And delete the class, right? You're not going to just, we were going to say we could implement the class, the string method we just described without having this custom.
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, let's look at the code. And it's pi, sorry. So we're talking about a method of the individual, which at one point we were calling them line items, right? It's in another screen. It's going to be too slow. Okay. What is the class name for the line item?
So it is that class name that we showed, but it's a private class because you're not supposed to access them individually. You're only supposed to access them through the job because the job is what contains the period unless the itemized value itself has a period.
Okay. You can define a class inside another class. That description was very confusing.
Yeah, I understand. It's just we go over it every time because it's a confusing concept, but it's hard to, if you want, I can go over that a little bit more slowly. I just hoped it would refresh your memory, that's all.
No, I'm saying this comment does not describe what this is very well.
Okay.
Like this here, like is something that you might put as like a comment inside. Like it's not necessarily something that would go in the doc string because you want to describe the functional meaning of this class. So this is the item inside. It represents a single item. That seems like a more descriptive term. It represents a single item inside a paycheck.
Okay, that should not be accessed publicly.
You could include that detail that says it should not be accessed publicly. Yeah. I don't think I would give it an underscore. Do you have a thought on that, Bryce?
But it is a private class, right?
It's not really private class in the way that you're talking about it. You would actually be setting attributes of it directly.
You don't set attributes of it, not that way.
You don't? Don't you set like the dot value of it?
You do, I suppose, but I worry that people will try to access it publicly and they shouldn't actually use the actual item publicly.
You don't have to include it in the all list, which actually you should add an all list here.
What?
You should add an all list.
Oh,
Underscore,
yes,
underscore,
okay.
all. Underscore, underscore.
But, okay, so, okay.
That
hang on.
exports the public classes that should be directly used inside other interviews.
I don't think there was anything. I don't know. It's one of those weird like doc assemble things that like nothing is really private, and it's encouraged to not be really private because you have to directly set attributes of stuff. Like if this was a more object-oriented way of doing things, you could not do that.
Use like a getter or a setter, you mean? That's
Yeah.
not really Python anyway. Python doesn't really encourage using getters and setters either.
Well, fair, but yeah, but it's mostly one of those like it's like I think the idea that you should if you I think the thing is if you see the name with an underscore in it, you should be using that's what you should be using privately. That's like what I'm understanding you to be saying, right, Michelle? Like you should never be
Yeah.
making this class yourself, and this underscore AO itemized value should not like show up in an objects block or in a code block or something. But it's
Yeah.
fine to set. No, people don't know what class they're setting the attributes of, so yeah, I guess it comes down to what you mean by private class. There's probably not a like specific thing it really means outside of Java where everything is super rigid.
Yeah, I will say I'm worried about people using the items themselves, but there shouldn't be. Yeah, I'm worried about that, but
It's just that private class just means something a little bit different and more specific than you're using it here,
Yeah.
but it's not like a big deal. I think you might just consider just adding it in the doc string itself. But I did not know that this was because of the name and the fact that it had an underscore and then the doc string. I had no idea that this was representing an item in a list directly. Like it seemed like it might be something totally different related to that. I would put that front and center and just say, this should not be, can't be calculated correctly, except as part of a itemized value dict. So I would describe how those
as
two
part
things
of
are
a
related.
job, but
The job is what has the attribute that it needs, not the dict.
yeah.
Okay. I would avoid the word private because it just doesn't mean what the way that you're using it here isn't actually the object-oriented meaning of private.
Okay.
And I would put the link between the different classes a little bit more directly.
Okay.
You do have it right here. And I was like saying, I didn't know it was that, but actually it does say that here, but I still didn't know that when I read it. And especially, I think it's this part that was really misleading to me because you need a class to represent the item. Like, right, we had that whole conversation. I was like, oh, you can delete this class. No, you obviously can't. You need a class to represent each item in the list, don't you? Were you thinking of just storing?
It could just be a dict, I think.
I would say like it's better to use a D.
I don't remember enough. You might be right.
Okay. I mean, you need to store two values. You need to store.
I mean, an object, but
it would be easier for it to be an object than a dictionary.
that's what I just get confused between Python objects and dicts. That's not what we have in JavaScript. That's all.
Got it. Okay. So you meant to, yeah, it could be
An object.
but it still deserves a class name, and it might have underneath is pass, right? But
Sure.
I think it's better to have one that can be used.
Shall I but I'll keep the underscore.
I don't think you should
Don't keep the underscore.
because you're talking about I find it
Okay.
confusing. It's just the item that's stored in the list, which is like just a normal pattern. You don't always want people to directly reference the thing, but you do because you're having them set attributes of it directly. So I find it, and you should definitely document the attributes in the doc string. You should say these are the attributes this will have, that it should have. That's important information to have too in the doc string. Like I try to avoid implementation details about like internal things about what it's doing. But it's important to say what the public API of the class is in the doc string.
Okay.
This is and how it will be composed.
Okay.
Because that's something I don't know from this at all. Like this, okay. How are these different objects composed? There's a value that goes into a dict. That's part of the job, and the job has two of those dicts. Kind of want to be able, the order is such that you have to have the things that are referenced later up front. Confuse you a little bit, but try to use the documentation strings to explain overall composition of the object too.
Okay.
That's obviously not a functional thing. It's just a matter of documentation, but I think it's good to get that clear for people who are reading this, who are trying to use it.
Okay.
This was really good clarifying because I really did not know what that was doing before.
Awesome.
So
I will try and remember all the details here. Yep.
is this actually true? Yeah, I'm looking at this. Does it actually store both negative and positive values, or does it only store one at a time? Normally.
It
Right, we
only
usually
stores one at a time.
That would be good to clarify too when you're looking at that.
Okay.
And I would say here, it is a dictionary of itemized values, even though it's in it. Have it up here
Okay.
and say what it would do functionally.
Oh, I thought that was an implementation detail.
No, it's about the composition of the class. So like that high level concept is good to know. Like what's basically what you would put in like a class diagram.
It's an
Okay.
implementation detail, but it is part of the API because people will be like using those values.
Okay.
Like
But
it will
they
be
shouldn't be using those values.
It might
I
need to know
guess.
the type of those objects though.
Okay.
And they
Yeah,
will be
the
using them
types.
because they're going to assign values, attributes to them, right?
Yeah, if they're assigning attributes to them, that's using them. Even if they're not if you're not like using it directly or like getting those attributes, you're still setting attributes to it.
Okay.
Maybe it would make more sense to think about it instead of the class being private, of like there are a few attributes on that class that you shouldn't use directly and you should go through the higher things, right? Because that's what it is. If like you don't want to directly use value there, you want to use it through job.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to explain in the doc string is like, yeah, how people should use it, right? Like that's the goal of the documentation is to let people understand how they are going to use it. That's the focus of the doc string. And then comments in line can be about why you made a choice to code something a particular way. but the doc string should be a way for people to know, I know I can look here and understand how to use this class. That's the goal.
Okay.
And it's a process of like continual improvement, right? Like
Should I change the name to like AL line item instead of itemized value?
I think we really struggled a lot with naming it. And even though
Yeah.
line item is one of the names we used, I feel like we came up with itemized value for a reason. So I don't want to,
Okay.
unless you remember.
I think there was something wrong with line item that we said it didn't always apply. So maybe that's what the problem was. It doesn't matter. We
I
won't
don't want to
re-examine
revisit
it
the
right now.
names.
Yeah,
I'm going to
let's
assume
not.
we came up with the right name.
Let's, yeah, let's not.
But if
revisit
we
that
just
at the moment.
explain the functional thing it does here with example
Yeah.
and say like, hey, sometimes you might call this a line item, and an example might be a value that you get for wages or something you pay for your union dues or insurance when you look at your paycheck. Having that example is really good. And then saying the attributes you would need to set are the value, and sometimes you might set the source, and sometimes you might set the name, depending on whether it's a custom one or something that the developer has a list of possibilities for in advance.
Yeah.
That
I
would be
think
like
it's,
really great to include that right there when you're looking at this, because this is where you would set those attributes of, and you might have a generic object that you need to know which class name you're going to reference in the generic object question. And you certainly need to know what attributes of it are important. Having the string method actually is one way to document that a bit, because it would trigger those, but still it should be in the doc string.
Okay.
And then you can say in there too, this would be contained. Normally it would only be used when it's contained inside an itemized value dict. And the itemized value dict itself would be part of an itemized job. You could say that in the doc string, that that's what its purpose is. I don't think you can define. Can you define that class inside the class definition of AL itemized job? Would that be clearer? I've never thought of doing that before. I just realized that I think Python does let you do that.
That doesn't sound more clear to me.
Okay,
but
then forget that idea then. Never mind.
okay.
It would just show the relationship of them is what I was thinking, but I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, but that's just the basic.
A lot
how to-
of work to do. Yeah.
It's no, I mean, it's like you've done, well, it is. I'm not going to discount the work. It is. Explaining things is hard.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's easier to just write stuff than just to explain it.
Yep. Yep. All right. Cool. Thank you.
Great. Okay, that was definitely not as fast as I thought it would be, but hopefully it gave some good direction. And I think this is, it's looking really close to being ready to merge. Actually, this explored more that I think I'm glad we talked about. I didn't even know this was the way that we would have to resolve some of those. But I don't know if Bryce, if you had wanted to look at it and review it too, because you were listed as a reviewer. That was part of why it's not merged yet too.
I'm not sure why. I don't think I need to be listed as a reviewer. I could try to take a look, but it's like one of those things that I don't know anything about it. So every time I try to ask questions on this, it feels like it's counterproductive. So
okay, I'll take it.
You don't have to.
Right. I wonder if there's a way for us to do like a commit, different kind of way of getting the black formatting. It's not always making a pull request. I find it really annoying. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that take you off? No, it doesn't. I think only you can take them off, Michelle. But
Okay. I'll take him off. I'll take you off.
okay.
Trying to remember to take you off.
Did we go through this one? Is this set from being talked about on Slack?
So no one actually gave comments. So
This one here?
like multi-signer, I see. Maybe. I think I probably need to work on it a bit and figure out what my next questions are. So I think so.
Okay. All right.
I don't know when I'll get to that considering the other stuff I have to do, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is like a blue sky thing. Is that right?
Yeah.
Phrasing for it. Yeah. It's not, doesn't have as immediate a need. Because I think Caroline will be able to use the GBLS thing for a while. Hopefully, I mean, they've been using it the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it will meet a similar needs that she has for a little while.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm interested to learn more about these. So we could jump to-
Okay. So let me see if I can gather my resources. Okay, so the reload handling. What happens, just to review, tell me if you already know all this, but what happens is a test is running, then someone else, for example, installs or pulls a project that has a module. Then that causes a server reload, which delays, but often actually stops and causes failure of the test that is already running.
It's the second, if you run a second test, is that what you're saying causes failures?
I mean, it can be, or it can be just a developer making a pull request with a module. Anything that reloads the server can cause a test to fail while a test is running.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So the solution for this is to detect when the server, the current solution, the MVP I've got, is to detect when a test is failing because of a reload issue, to let the developer know that in the report. And then to just, you can only set Cucumber to retry failing tests. So we've set Cucumber to retry all failing tests. Not the failing tests, but all failing tests.
So we don't know, this is within the particular workflow, right? So if you have another separate GitHub workflow file for unit tests, that won't rerun, even if that fails. It will only affect the AL kill.
Yes.
Assuming it's its own workflow file.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. That sounds like a really good solution to
Okay.
failures.
All right. I was hoping for something that could be more like convenient, like rerunning those steps that were necessary, like reloading the page and then rerunning just the steps that were necessary, but it's impossible to tell which steps were necessary.
That sounds like something you could try to do as an optimization down the line, but sounds like it's not possible. But even if you were,
Wait,
I know if
steps
developers
as
might-
necessary or scenarios as necessary?
Steps. So to redo the page, basically, to redo the inputs on the page.
Yeah, that seems like it would be a lot more fragile. Sorry, I'll just.
feels like it's okay just to do the brute force thing because it's server time that we're using rather than
Yep.
server time.
So, yep, that's one of the risks.
That sounds great. Sounds like that will really help with some of the kinds of failures that can cause the kiln test to be less informative. So
Yeah. And it only reruns things once. So it gets 2 tries to pass it. And that's what we get.
and
Um,
on the test server, which there's not anybody using regularly anymore, I think. I was for a while, but I've stopped using it the last year.
yeah, yeah.
So it's really most likely to be tests interfering with each other.
That's quite possible. Like, especially if you make 2 commits really close together.
Yeah. Should we change anything about when tests run? Should they run only on pull request rather than on every commit? It's nice to have it on commit, I guess.
Well, I guess, but then it wouldn't necessarily run. I guess we could try and make it run on any commit to master and only pull requests other than that. Seems a little weird.
No, I mean, that's the way that I think we set up Black. And-
Okay.
I feel like that's fine because the playground doesn't give you a way to run Black, for example. So there's
Right.
no, it doesn't really make sense to do a pull request. Then you have to figure out how do I pull that change back in? That's like a really intrusive thing. It's already a little bit intrusive how many times it tells you you have an extra line or extra space at the end of a line.
Okay, so if you want, add that in there and we can add that as an issue to the library, but I don't think it'll be part of this PR.
Yeah, no,
Part
it was
of
just
this,
ways to reduce the collision of tests.
yeah.
I don't know if we do, because I do think it's really helpful to see it is actionable information on every commit. If some people commit a lot, it might cause some of these collisions, but
I think that is partially the problem. At least for me, I tend to commit a few, like make two or three commits in the span of 5 minutes, and then there are 3 tests running, and I really only need to get the last one or something like that.
Mm.
so maybe pull requests are. So do you think pull requests would be frequent enough for you?
At least for me, yeah. I don't know how it works if it's just pull requests, if it's every commit on the pull request, because I mean, I have pull request and then I push 2 or 3 commits.
With the Black auto formatter, whatever rules are there, which I think I copied from the default rules or whatever the GitHub library was, what they call it.
Action,
Yeah, but the action came from a library.
okay,
I don't know what they called that library.
okay.
It was like
Repository,
It does run every commit once the pull request is open. It does
Yeah.
not run until you open the pull request.
okay. I'd love to see the action that they have. That would be convenient.
Yeah, I should be able to just copy it. I mean, we have a copy of it in our GitHub workflow. But I just used their documentation to create it.
So just link to that and I'll take a look. Or if you, yeah,
Run the pull request, push main, pull request to main.
it could be just pull requests.
Yeah, that seems fine. Because I still like it does tell people, oh, I have a completed thought here, which I
Yeah.
do use commits sometimes when they're not completed thoughts, especially if it's the end of the day. I'm like, oh, I don't want to risk losing this on the server. Maybe,
Okay,
maybe it's a bad habit, but it might help everybody basically, right? Because we're sharing the same test server. It might help
Yeah.
everybody if we have fewer tests run.
yeah, sure.
Only thing is it won't help student developers as much because they're unlikely to use. Oh, but they'll get commits
Yes.
to main though, so that's fine. They're also likely to use main for everything.
Yeah, it runs the tests. It doesn't matter that they're developing on the dev server. Still runs the tests on the test server.
What I was going to say, the reason why my thought process, which isn't too relevant, was students don't use pull requests, so they won't get the benefit of these tests. But I realized they do commit to main for everything, so they will get the benefit.
Yeah, got it, got it.
I think that's
Yeah.
and this would really just affect the default test that gets installed when someone goes through the Kiln setup, right? We could change it
Yes.
for our packages, obviously, but it wouldn't be part of
Yeah,
it would be part of editing our workflow files.
yeah, yep. This would just change the setup interview code that gets generated. So individual packages would have to update that. It's not controlled by our thing. Okay, very cool.
Okay, and then the random input tests. Also, long time dream. That's exciting.
Yes, it's going to keep failing until we update the repository. But that's not interesting. That's not a necessary thing to look at.
Is that like a permanent other package, or is it just used for?
It's a permanent other package that lets us test ALKiln.
It just has a bunch of Docker symbol interviews.
It's tests of Kiln itself. Got it. That's why it's Docker symbol.
Yeah.
Prefix package.
So random input testing, possible MVP. So right now it's very hard to create feature tests for our random input testing. We might be able to create like a seed, but that would take some work as well. And it might just be better to create a feature file and see if that's possible. And I have a couple ideas of how to do that.
Okay.
But the MVP right now, what it does is it takes a picture of every screen that it goes through. And I don't know how to demo.
Should I stop my share?
Maybe. Let me see if I would be able to demo. No, random input test. Okay, there, I've got one. I can show you what the output is.
Sure.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the idea is like this could be a way to reconstruct exactly what went wrong.
So you get a folder called random answer screenshots. Right now, that's what it's called. And then you recreate. It just shows you what was chosen on each page. Other than buttons, it doesn't show you buttons. I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but we can think about that.
It's like a little video, so you could recreate.
Yeah.
If you know the logic of the interview, maybe you could figure out what button was pushed. I guess that's something.
Yeah, especially on assembly line where you've got the page ID. So that's what it does on that test.
That looks awesome. I mean, I think it's really nice to have the feature file, so then you could always run that test again. Like, oh, it failed once, I should have that as one of my battery of tests. But
yeah,
this gives you the tools you need to know what happened in the interview.
Yeah. So this is kind of an MVP idea.
That looks worth it.
All right. Very cool. And other than that, it's just, I mean, there's things that are handled, and most things should be handled, and I'm sure we'll find things that aren't handled, but that was the question about MVP, whether that was sufficient to be called MVP. I'm not sure it's enough to close the issue, but maybe it is, and maybe we can make new issues for further features.
Let's take a look and see here.
I think the issue is actually a discussion right now. I'm not sure. Or there is an issue, but there's also.
Yeah, it just says get through a
discussion.
form by generating random input. So I think the binary, it passes random or not passes random, is
Yeah.
already helpful information. And then you'd want to know, like, oh, there's some wrong assumption the testing library has made. And you could learn that from the screenshots, but there'd be something to follow up on if a random input test fails.
Yep. Though generally speaking, it doesn't fail. It just says this was a result. Because if the person gets invalid input, that may be a correct behavior. So
Okay.
I think it would fail on a system error, but I don't know how to recreate that yet.
That's fair. I was gonna say that's the thing that is, I do think if we can make it fail on a system error, that's the thing that I would want to use a lot of random input testing to avoid, because like random input testing to avoid like, oh, my validation isn't quite correct. Like I don't think that's something we'll ever really get to. But we can get to like, it is a thing I have to deal with often in DocAssemble of like, oh, DocAssemble crashed because somewhere, somehow, like this one attribute wasn't defined and it's not shown anywhere in the playground as being an issue, but it is in your interview. And so like, that's the big thing that I think this will squash hopefully a lot.
Yep. I'm not sure if, I guess we could try a thing where a template have an interview where a template is missing or an attribute is missing and see if that creates a failure.
The only thing I'm looking at it now, would it be super hard for it to change instead of like I do for X amount of screens to do sort of the same way that the tables are done and just like I go until I see X page ID?
Not exactly, because I mean, if they have kickout screens that are correct endings, then that doesn't work, right? You could possibly have a couple different types of steps, but kickout screens won't work for that. And getting stuck on validation won't work for that.
Could you set up alternate ending screens? Could you just list till I hit page ID X, Y, or Z? Because there's a
That's
finite
possible.
number.
That might be possible. Okay, maybe add that. I don't know if that's MVP, but that's a good issue to add. It depends what we want MVP to be, right? So let me just write down.
You are right that most interviews you would want to use this for will have some screening out questions. So I think you're probably right. That's an important feature to be able to handle.
Sure.
But the alternate way of doing it, I tried to run for 20 screens or something. I mean, I guess a kickout screen is success. It means that you tested a branch where the person can't continue.
Yeah, honestly, I'm trying to think of maybe if it's not like you list all of the possible kickout screens, but it's just you went to, maybe it makes more sense if you went to like interview end, which is an event screen where there's no more like option.
But
buttons.
sometimes there is like a restart button,
That's fair.
That was an earlier.
and then you're just forever.
Can we just hard code a rule for restart being handled specially?
Yeah, that would be
We could, but there could be other buttons.
There always could be other buttons. So I mean, heuristics are still really useful, even if they don't capture everything.
Yeah, I'm just saying that like they'll still need a max number of screens or some IDs or some way of saying where to halt this.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Okay, we've at least gotten to enough to, yeah, like you've convinced me that it is not MVP. And because mostly at most, I guess that makes more sense if you're thinking about that. The only other thing is I don't know if this also doesn't feel like it'd be MVP because it'd be a lot harder. But the thing that would make this is say if I wanted to run this a lot for like not just one random input test every time you run it, but like several different random input tests, I'm assuming you would just have to copy paste and make like 10 scenarios. There's not a way to run a scenario like 5 times.
Yeah,
easily.
Not right now.
Okay.
So that's part of why this is MVP
Yeah.
and not. Just a sec. Sorry.
Can you restart interviews? In the future. Maybe you can.
What's that? Restart menus?
No, restart an interview. Like, you could just have one step. You could have like the given I start the interview, and then I answer randomly for 20 pages, and then another given I start the interview, or like, and I start the interview. Like, I don't know what happens if you do two.
You can do it.
start the
You can
interviews.
do it multiple times in the same scenario.
Okay.
Just in the same.
Yeah, you just have like you could append, can you edit the URL or can you use a menu item? Like either, there's two ways. For assembly line interviews, we have a restart menu item. And for every interview, you can append reset equals 1 to the URL.
I'm
Yeah,
even thinking
you
using
can
that of
see-
just starting the URL. Like
You can say,
like,
given I go to all tests and I
Mhm.
put in random answers, given I go to all tests and I put in random answers.
Yeah.
Like you can repeat those multiple
I wondered
times.
if I wonder if it's MVP, if that could that could be one step of just like, given I run this interview randomly for at most 20 pages 5 times.
I don't see that it's impossible. Like I think that would, let me put it a different way. I think that would be possible. I'm not sure it's MVP.
Okay, that's fair. I guess I'm not sure what the complexity there would be, but other than just adding another feature step.
I'm not completely either, but it would.
It is another feature step. That's fair.
It is another feature step, and also if they put it in if they put a bunch of inputs in to begin with and then said random tests, then it would have to go back to the correct page, right? And they wouldn't be able to do that.
That's fair. Yeah, that wouldn't work, and that's not what I'm thinking of for this feature. I'm thinking of just like, let it loose on 3 interviews and go, or
Yeah.
like up a whole bunch of times, because that's how you actually find the bugs. And with random stuff, you find the bugs by like running it a lot more than you would want to manually type out in a feature file. And so that's just my only like thought for making this like extremely useful. But it's still there. It's still there.
Part of the complexity is allowing it to fail multiple times and still continue the scenario. Like, I'm not sure that's possible.
That's fair. Oh, I see. Okay.
So if it failed,
like 1,000 tests and say, okay, the first 300 of them failed, but 700 worked.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I don't. That too is possible, but you're right. That is more complex because I'm doing something similar in the accessibility thing, where we keep going even if there is an accessibility error, like in a big one.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just for the table step.
Yeah, but here you wouldn't get the reported failures, right? You wouldn't get the failures wouldn't report out. I mean, I could put them in the report, but the test wouldn't come out as a failure where it probably should.
I see. Okay. So once that's in, then we could do something like this.
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I guess is one random failure out of 1,000 tests, for example, does that mean the test should fail?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you still want to know.
Yes, it should, one random failure should.
Yeah, one random error is enough, actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, as long as we're only failing on errors and it's not like, oh, your validation didn't work. I agree, like that shouldn't be a failure. But if you can hit an error screen on a DocAssemble interview, that's a failure.
Yeah, no, you're right. That is okay.
So, yeah, I think for the general, this is sort of fuzzing, not really, it's kind of just fuzzing. And I know the way you do fuzzing is you make it like you might have some false positives pass, but as long as you have like something where you can draw the line, and it's like everything that does this is a failure, you'll still catch a lot of bugs. So
okay, so we want to err on the side of false positives. No, on false negatives, rather, I guess.
No, you want to err on this. I think you want to err on the side of false positives, because otherwise you'll have a lot of failures that are like, oh, is this actually broken? No, so it just doesn't. It can't figure out the validation.
We just want to detect errors.
Yeah.
We want our threshold for what is an error to be relatively high, as low as we can do realistically, but we are willing to exclude some failures.
But we don't want a test to appear to pass.
Failure.
Yeah, every failure should be detected as a failure.
Okay, well, that's the thing is, what are we talking about failures though? Because
Well, I
If it's,
think
if, it-
we,
if it's
I
like
think,
just an interview logic
think-
failure. Yeah.
I think we branched off on two things. One is, can we run the tests multiple times in one scenario? And
Yeah.
that's what I was discussing, because I was saying you'd have to prevent a failure from actually failing in order to do that.
Mhm.
And that is not something we want. We want them to see a failure. That's separate from what is a failure. That's a different question. The question about this is, if it does actually fail, like there is a system error, an attribute is missing, something like that, then we do want it to fail.
Yeah. And I think as long as it's like something that we can do in a single step, then that's doable, because that's something I've done with the accessibility. Where
Yeah,
you can just keep going.
but it doesn't fail it. It still passes it. If the accessibility fails, it doesn't fail the eventual step. It doesn't fail the eventual test, I don't think.
No, it does.
It does?
That was something I did specifically work on. It will progress through, like if it's a story table and it's like, find any accessibility errors in this interview. If it finds like, or not, no, yeah, sorry, yeah. If there's a step that says like, I look for accessibility errors in the rest of this interview, instead of on every single page you have to re-say it,
I
then
think I
it will
can.
progress all the way through the interview, and it just sets a flag, and then after the scenario is done, it's like a flag with enough information to tell what the error was, and then in the like after scenario section, it sees, oh, was this flag set? It was. It failed. The dump is here, and like the whole scenario fails.
Fail on random input failure.
Sounds like that would solve the problem of letting it run multiple times, huh? If we just kind of copied that logic.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah, but I think you're right.
But it would only fail once, and you'd need a list.
Yeah.
List of which random tests failed. Right?
Yeah. No, I agree. That's a thing. I think in the accessibility feature, it prints. It still like shows up in the report, and it prints out like accessibility has its like own report file essentially, and it's like added to the report of, hey, I dumped out in this file. But you're right, we would want an easier way to say, oh, these are all of the ones that failed. That might not be necessarily MVP, but at least I'm saying it's possible. So I like, that's, the blocker is not there necessarily, besides for just the work to do it. I don't think the blocker is figuring out how to do that, was all I was trying to say.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think though there are two major problems right now that this PR doesn't handle, though I'd still like to merge the PR itself, just not complete the MVP, which is saving the pictures in a file with a timestamp so that they can run multiple random tests in one scenario if they so choose, or feel clever enough to do so, and to make sure that system errors do fail.
Yeah, the last one is the more important one, and that's the one I'm not sure of how to do off the top of my head. So.
All right, so this is good. We've established this PR is not MVP, though it might be a good stepping stone.
I think this is like extremely good stepping stone. This is like the core part of the feature that I think we need to have. So I'm very excited about it.
Awesome.
Agreed.
Awesome.
This is like really, really nice to be able to have a way to let people. Yeah, it's doing totally different kind of testing than we could do. Think of it like with the multiple feature, multiple runs. Some things you can never imagine. That's really great.
All right.
All right.
Okay. We're not seeing your screen, by the way, Quentin.
I'm looking at it to see what we can go to next. Yeah, I'll share it too. Okay. Do you mind if I just ask about the review screen generator? Trying to work on this a little bit. And
yeah.
Interesting. So
I'm not sure when we'll work on phone number glitches anyway. There's a lot to do right now. So
okay. Well, I think the phone number feature has been pretty useful. I've been using it in a couple of different interviews.
Matt's been using
Being
it.
able to set a default value is, sorry, Bryce, go ahead.
I was just saying Matt's been using it too. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think we want to be able to set a default value at some point, but it's not like a blocker for it being useful, for sure.
Sure. Sure.
So the review screen generator, I'm gonna just go to like my notes. I guess that's probably the best thing. Helping someone build a review screen for an interview, which is there's multiple templates that are all generated from one question file. The idea is like there's a library of questions, just like we're trying to build with our interviews, right? That you can draw from, and you could do up to like 1,000 different templates. So a lot of questions, as you can imagine. There's like 30,000 lines in the question file, I think. Anyway, so it's like we really need to automate a way to get this review screen. They weren't using the Weaver for every interview because that didn't make sense. So that wasn't the play, like the starting point in the Weaver or something that maybe you could build on, but anyway, that wasn't relevant to this use case. So I started to build a feature in there in the Weaver, in the dashboard already, to do something a lot like what the Weaver does, which is build revisit blocks and tables for every list. And that ends up covering almost every use case in this big question file. But you end up with like a 30 column table. And then if you click the edit button, you're going to get a bunch of attributes that might not actually be used in the selection of templates that you chose out of that 1,000 templates. Because there would be maybe in a realistic template, you might use like 2 attributes of a person, but there's 30 possibilities, let's say. My thought was the best I could think of to fix that would be just manually building this review screen capability. We'd have to like do like a URL action for each thing manually. Like, I don't think it fits naturally into a review screen. Or like, even though most of the time these items about a person, maybe you have at most 2 of that person realistically. You think of most interviews, right? Like you're not usually listing dozens of people on one form. Maybe if they're your children and you have a large family, for me, it would have been 9. That's still, right? You could manually hard code a review table row for 9 children and then repeat that for every attribute of interest. Like child ones, I don't know. I can't think of a random attribute name, but let's say birth date was the thing that's not relevant for every person, but you always want to be able to ask it. So there's a question for it, but you don't actually use it for every person. So birth date would be a good one. You could like have 9 rows, person 1's birth date, edit, and use the regular review block format for that. But that might be better. I don't know a way to make it look like a regular review block and have each person listed. I'm just trying to decide, like, is it helpful to let people go to a screen for all the information about all of the people and see all the people in one screen? Is that a way to do it? And if so, I think the built-in table and revisit screen feature doesn't really get you there because it's going to be too many attributes that are possible. Or if you go to, or would really people want to review one person at a time on a screen? Or would you want to list to have the screen be, here's the basic information about the people, like their name and their address. And then further down the review screen would be a list of things like these more obscure attributes. Like, okay, the developer made that be an attribute of the person, but when you're thinking of reviewing your answers, is that the way you would really logically organize it? Would you want to see everything about the person in one place, especially if that person happens to be you? Or would you rather see it right up front in the review screen, listed as a separate item, and then having to go to the person's information page first before you can see the individual items to edit?
It's a good question.
And then,
Is this generating code or is it just to be clear, I might have missed that. Is it generating code or is it doing it at runtime?
it generates a YAML file. So
Okay.
that then you can continue to refine, because I think that the idea of doing it dynamically is unrealistic, that you're going to be able to capture all the nuance someone needs to put into a review screen.
I agree.
I can probably run it on our project so you can see. I can't do that like 30,000 line question file probably, but I can do it just with our. Let's see. I'm going to try to work on making the APIs be optional, by the way, in the install dashboard. I'd pinged you on that issue, Michelle, but I think I'll finish that up today probably. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
So what I would want to do is, let's see, what do I have here? Just pause my share here for a second. So what it does actually is pretty smart. Like well, it's not really using the objects block right now, but it does, it's aware of object blocks. And my thought is there could be some kind of questions that are generic object questions where you want to generate review screens too. You can't just have X in the review screen block, because that won't work unless the whole screen is a generic object screen. What it does is it parses, it looks for an objects block, and then it will parse the question YAMLs and look for any times that it uses an iterator I. And it's only doing anything with the objects that represent a list right now. And I think that covers real world use cases. You're not often using generic object and having it not be a list. But there's some examples of that. I mean, but in our assembly line framework that we're optimizing around, that tends to not be true. We make every person into a list, for example. So there would be some scenarios where I might go back in and enhance it so it handles generic objects better than it does now.
But it's not just for people anyway, right?
Yeah, it doesn't actually know that they're a person, but I'm thinking I need to put in some heuristics that group things like address attributes and name attributes.
I see.
That
Got
already
it.
has a lot of columns.
Got it.
Okay, so I'm going to do this where it generates the review screen from, let's do the question test file, the baseline file, and then that should be all we need actually, because the baseline file has the objects blocks that it needs. And so it's taking you to the revisit screen. So you just see chiropractors, and the only thing it would display about chiropractors is their name, right? Because that's the string method of the chiropractor. It doesn't show any other attributes in this summary table that you see on the review screen. And then here's the table that it generates for right now. Well, that's interesting. Like I don't really, well, if it has Mako, maybe I should have it do something different for maybe I should detect Mako. Definitely. That one's not very good.
That's kind of funny.
What's that?
So that's just kind of funny that it picks it up.
Yeah. Well, it's just looking at the label and then using that as the label for that column in the table. And then this could probably be condensed to a show if def, I guess. But no, it couldn't be show if def. Could be show if def only if I used attribute name. Maybe that's better.
So this looks like it kind of requires using assembly line. Is that correct?
No, it doesn't require using assembly line, but all it's scanning for right now are to build these revisit tables. It's going to only affect lists. That's actually the only thing that
I just mean like address label,
that happens.
unit label.
That just happens to be what was used in
Oh, okay.
the actual YAML file I uploaded.
Okay.
So this is what it looks like. I'm just curious if anyone has ideas about, like, I find it's like a little confusing to have to click on the person's name or on the list of all of the people rather,
Mm.
and then see a list of all of the attributes and then edit and then have to change all the attributes in a row when you only care maybe about one thing.
Mm.
Also that it's not right there on the review screen is a little bit problem, but I don't know. I don't know if I've described it well enough for people. I think you've all worked with review screens. Any ideas?
Well, I don't know. I personally, I think I would want to see the person and their attributes listed on like every person and all their attributes listed on one page, as opposed to clicking on editing users, because I'd be wanting to like check, are my answers right? And I wouldn't want to do that by clicking on each individual person. That's my take on it. Like, I wouldn't want, like, I'd be going there to check my answers, and I probably wouldn't click through into each individual person just to check my answers.
Yeah, here it would be every list of people. Not every
Okay.
person.
Okay. That is a bit better.
But still, I kind of feel the same way as you, Michelle. Like if I'm on a review page, I want to be able to see all of my answers in a summary form. I don't want to have to click another button to see the summary.
Yeah. So if there's not a list, it will just, but you're working with lists, of course. Okay.
For not a list, you just see if it's, yeah, you just see it directly.
Yeah.
The thing that's not handled specially are generic object attributes of a thing that aren't in a list. It's like that very specific combination. The review screen generator does not do anything with yet.
I have to say I do avoid because I haven't used it in a while. I don't remember how to use it properly, but that's my problem.
Here's an example of a specific question. So there was a specific question for user 0. It happened to be an item in a list, but you'll get the specific review screen generated for it too. But if that had been like spouse.language, it would have done the same thing.
Yeah.
If you had a generic question for language and you never had a specific one for spouse, and spouse was not in a list, let's put that aside actually, because that's just a different feature I haven't really started working on yet, except I've started collecting the list of objects. So
Okay.
all right, so the problem with the idea of showing everything on the one review screen is you don't know how big the list of people is going to be. But we could.
But I mean, the person could edit this, right? They could choose to edit it, the developer.
Yeah, I have found the current review screen generator without these features to work really well for real world interviews I have. But just this particular person has 30,000 lines. So
yeah,
I like make them, that was like months of their work. And then
yeah, it's fair.
It's redoing all of that effort and rethinking the logic that you had originally. It's nice.
I mean, could there be some options at the beginning of that they don't just upload, they also say, I want these all on one page, or I want them each on separate pages? That's a lot of work to do, I feel, for you. but it seems a shame to punish everybody just because one person has 30,000 lines.
Well, there's two things that I was thinking would be good to like ask about here on this call. One is like, well, what is a good way to handle that scenario, right? It doesn't have to be binary. Like it doesn't have to be only one way that we let people generate it. Here, I do have a question that lets people say if they want to make the revisit screens, but there's not really a good alternative. It just doesn't create them for you. It doesn't replace them with another option, but we could definitely say, there's two ways to generate the screens. Do you want to use this way or this way? Do you want tables or do you want inline review screens?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of how the inline review screen should work. Another idea that I had is, I mean, the main questions are, should this be done attribute by attribute? Should every review block be respective of one attribute? And then also be like per person.
I mean, that seems a little, maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying. What I'm hearing sounds a little crazy that you would only edit one attribute at a time for each individual person. Like, that's not a review screen. That's basically redoing the interview.
That's the way that review screens mostly work.
But usually they have a list of things you're editing. They have a bunch of stuff. They don't just have one. You mean that an edit, if you hit edit, it only edits one attribute at a time, but it would display them all at once?
It takes you to a screen where that attribute is defined.
Okay, got it. So when you hit edit, you can edit each individual attribute. Okay, got it.
I could try to keep the hierarchy of the question and then just say, use this question screen title. That actually is the way that it works as well. So let me see, I'll show you that. It's not really doing it for lists right now. I hadn't implemented it that way yet, but it certainly could. Let's see. Well, it's going to be hard with this file because it's mostly about. These are almost all lists because it's from our question library.
Yeah.
But here, this is one. Okay, so for the user's name, it shows all, it's the edit button is user's name.first. But the
block is showing all of them.
All of the things on that screen. Yeah.
Okay.
I can definitely, okay, so that's actually really good to think about. Like, okay, if we do.
And that one isn't editing user's name.address, by the way. Even though address is in the list, I just want to point that out.
Because it's on the same screen, it will take you to the screen where both things are defined.
Oh, the address and the name are defined on the same screen? Oh, okay. And the gender, okay.
This is from our question test page.
Interview. Oh, okay. Got it.
It'll follow whatever logic the author of the interview originally used.
Okay.
Just reflect it back. We have all this information from scanning the YAML file. We know what questions were asked. We know what attributes were listed on that, and we know what what iterator was used, if we know if I was used with the list on that screen. So we could recreate the question screen. That actually seems like a good solution. But now the question is like, well, then what about if there's only one person in the list? Great, we can handle that by setting it to be 0. You know, users bracket 0. We could make a question screen for users bracket 0, even if the interview only refers to question bracket I. But we don't know how to handle an arbitrary number of items in that list. Like one thing could be special case. First 5 items maybe. So generate review blocks for up to 5 items in every list, and then have an overflow screen for everybody else.
That seems reasonable.
5
Though
items is in the
sometimes-
first 5 people.
For 5 people, yeah. And we don't know they're people, that's why I say items, but yeah. But
Sure,
generally,
but that's. Sorry, is that the? I think I'm getting confused on what the like original thing that we're trying to solve is. I thought we're trying to solve like one person having 30 attributes, not a ton of people in a single list.
it's one person having 30 attributes. That's the challenge. But the problem is once you have an I in the list, it's really easy to solve that for, like, we don't have one edit button for everything in the interview. We know that that's a dumb way to do it, and we don't. But as soon as you start to have an I in the list, you need some way to like display multiple people on that screen. So
Yeah.
you have to make a choice that fits it. So one choice, which is what the review generator in the Weaver does right now, is it will generate a revisit table. You go to another screen where you see every person, you see every attribute of that person. And that generally works for one interview for one purpose. That's fine. The problem is once you have a lot of attributes that your interview asks for, that really doesn't scale. You can't have one edit button that edits all 30 attributes, and you can't really show 30 attributes on one screen. So you need to go back to degranularizing it. So it's grouped by question screen again. Assume the author got the question screens to be the right scope for a reasonable chunk of information for people to see.
Mhm.
And then, but then you have to be like, okay, well, if I do that, how do I show multiple people? Table doesn't really work. You don't want to say like, okay, click this button to see the list of people and their attributes related to this 3 things, and click this button to see the list of people and their list of attributes for these 3 other things. You want to see it all in one place. Maybe only first 2 items is okay.
Maybe.
So my thought would be like here, we have user 0, generate users 1, and have the same thing here, all the things that were asked on one screen. And then have a third block that was generated where it was this repeated, like 4 item in users : or 2 : empty string.
Mm.
Just repeat this block. Or, and then we'd have to recreate the edit block for each individual person though, right? Like we wouldn't be able to use the edit block built into this page.
Guess.
I don't know what it would be. It would be a note field. It wouldn't have any edit button. It would be a note field and an individual edit buttons.
I think I'm not really
I'm still-
absorbing it right now.
I think you lost me again. I had it until you lost me when you said that the table suddenly won't work again. Like, because that's what I'm like. Can you? Is there not a? I guess there's not a way to have an edit button by each column. I guess the other thing I'm not really sure about is why not have an edit button by a lot of different attributes. Like, if someone's using, I will say someone's probably using the interview wrong if they have to like go through the entire interview and then like edit 50% of the stuff or like a large chunk of like things that they said in the interview on the review screen. Like, I think the review screen is supposed to be a very easy like Michelle has said before, of like, you should be able to go through and glance and make sure all of your answers were correct, and then you should have the ability to edit any like 2 or 3 smaller things. So I don't see why it's an issue to have a lot of edit buttons for like each individual attribute.
No, I'm okay with a lot of edit buttons. Like, so it's just, we have to figure out what manual thing we want to add. So, but keep in mind, answer sets expand the scope of when people are going to use review screens too. Because if you have an answer set where you've like, okay, I've answered 99% of the things, but you're going to end up having to change. Hopefully, if you're going to copy that answer set, you're changing a few things for each given reuse of the answer set. But still,
Oh, it's okay.
I'm going to use the review screen a little bit different way and more frequently. It's not just to correct errors.
Okay, that's okay. I understand that.
So are you saying keep the table? Well, the problem is you can't hide and display columns dynamically. At least
Because I thought you could. I thought that, or do they just show? Are they just there and they're just still blank? I haven't. I
thought if they caused an error of some kind, then they didn't show up.
No, it will keep tracing through, but if the column is empty, it'll still display.
Oh, okay. So the whole column is still there. It's just that particular attribute is empty.
Yeah.
Are we meaning row when we say column?
No, I think we mean column specifically.
Yeah, the empty.
We mean the
just not.
So the row's value for that column is empty, but the column itself is still there.
Mm-hmm.
These are columns, Michelle. So the column is every attribute, basically.
Oh, okay.
And well, I think I do like the idea of showing screen by screen, whatever screens the user wrote originally in their interview file, reflect those in the review screen. For lists also, and keep in mind that most of the time people are only going to have 2 items per list. I'm going to just draw a line somewhere. I don't know if 2 is right. Yeah. We could pre-generate the specialized question screen for user 1, user 0, and user 1. But the overflow, we need some way to do it. It could be in a table. I guess we could make the table understand the fields on that screen, generate a table for every screen combo. So it could be like address screen table, and then show all of the leftover users. And just show the things that the author already grouped on a screen in a table still. And like, here's all the rest of the people. User 1, user 3, user 4, user 5, user 6. They're going to be on this table instead of having you see the expanded view of them because you're less likely to have that many people. This was already really helpful. Thank you for letting me talk you through it so far.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was, but yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think I know the direction. Yeah, like I think that was really good to think of the way of organizing it so that it's by screen still is the right way to go, and then making tables if we're going to use tables.
I think if you had multiple items and you just went at the bottom, you said next item or whatever, or just next to see the next one, that wouldn't be so terrible. I think clicking on each individual one and then clicking back and then clicking on each individual one. But if you're going through them one at a time, I don't know. Anyway.
Well, no matter what, well, I'm not totally sure if I know what you mean, but I think, yeah, I mean, there's not like a carousel feature, but I guess we could probably use it anyway.
I've done something roughly, or I had to do something like that roughly for the case search that like lets you like do a next and a back. It was kind of a hack, and I don't know how well it will generate or how well it will work with the review screen stuff though. So, it's possible. It's just kind of hacky.
Well, in this case, there's some finite number that the user was able to fill in manually, right? So it's going to be a lot smaller than the list of found cases can be, essentially. So we could just generate all of them in the HTML and then just use JavaScript to show or hide certain ones. It doesn't have to be as smart as the feature that you have today. Okay, well, I mean, I'll stop there. I'll let you see the feature and you might have more ideas about it, but this was good brainstorming already. So thanks.
Yeah. Great.
All right. Okay. Thanks everybody. We'll talk to you all at the end of the week.
All right.
Sounds good.
Thank you.